I'm so happy to have an amazing multi-passionate woman here who's also a dear friend. And she's also someone in my life who I would call one of my fun coaches. And so I'm really happy to be able to share my fun coach and this amazing multi-passionate woman with you all today. So welcome, Rhonda. This is Rhonda LoPresti. And Rhonda does many, many things. So Rhonda, if I say to you, I believe you to be multi-passionate, how do you feel about that? And what does being multi-passionate kind of bring up for you?
You're the first person to introduce this concept to me. So I've been having a lot of fun playing with it. What does it mean to be multi-passionate? Um, one of the very first things I wanted to ask you is, what do you mean by it? Because, sometimes I'm wondering if people might think if you're passionate, then you'd be passionate about something in a singular way, like you're passionate about singing or you're passionate about scuba diving, something that you're really passionate about, or maybe passionate about your career for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that we connect um, to be passionate is all consuming. And
Mm,
it's this, unless you have this myopic vision, and unless you're all in on something, you can't be all in on something else. And I actually find that very reductionist. And I find it almost self-limiting
mhm,
because it has the danger of tying your identity up in one thing. And I think identity is something that should be experienced and have growth and be able to move towards things and move back from things. Yet if you're the person who's just kind of known as like, oh, well, Julie's really passionate about filmmaking. Well, then what if Julie becomes interested in something else and the
mhm.
filmmaking starts to lessen and maybe the movement coaching takes over for the next couple of months, but then maybe they both come back in. Am I not allowed to be really passionate about one thing? Am I not allowed to change? And also, because I believe that everything is connected to everything, mind and body, everything we do that influences us for something, as much as we're drawn towards something, we're maybe kind of moved, repelled or repulsed against something else. Like the things we're influenced against are as important as the things we're influenced towards. And I think there's this thing where we've stopped celebrating like the polymath. So everyone loves Leonardo da Vinci. He was the Renaissance man was multi-passionate. So I feel that I would like to bring that back. I very much identify with this Renaissance woman, and I feel we've tried to categorize things so much that, if you're interested in your physical health and fitness, like, oh, well, you're just a meathead. Well, no, what if I'm an intellectual cultural artist who's also interested in health and fitness? What if you're the intellectual who then goes, do you know what? I went on holiday and I started scuba diving, and I think this could be my thing. And it can be your thing, but it also doesn't mean you're still not that thing.
Mhm.
So there's I think there's a difference between what do you spend most of your time doing? What are you passionate about? And your ability to excel across multiple fields. And I feel the idea of the expert or the master is actually very reductionist. And I'm all for being a happy generalist. And that also means I'm an eternal student in everything. And that when I do the things I do, I am passionate about them.
Mhm.
Like I love learning. I love gardening. I love going on desert adventures with you. I love you're passionate about many things. I love learning about end of life from you, about what it means to be a racing car driver, of what it was to be having adventures on the Baja Peninsula in the 1970s. Like you're ahead of the game, my friend. Like your family was doing van life. Um, so to be multi-passionate is about being interested
Mhm.
and not being myopic and not self-limiting.
Mhm.
So when someone says, what do you do? I'd really prefer it to say, if someone asks, like, what things do you do? What kind of
Mhm.
things do you do? Because I found this question like, oh, hi, my name's like, oh, so and so, meet you. So, oh, hi, what do you do? And I'm like, and I used to just sound flaky because it would be like, well, I'm really into visual anthropology, and then there's this parkour thing and this filmmaking thing, but I'm also really into travel. And this person's looking at you going like, well, you're not an accountant and you're not a filmmaker. Like you can just see people kind of write you off.
Mhm.
Yet this used to be the Renaissance. This was a time of growth and expanse and understanding. And I want to bring that back. Like, I just want to celebrate it because I know so many people who are multi-passionate.
Mhm.
And being passionate about two things does not diminish your ability to excel because you have more than one.
Mhm.
And I feel it's an invitation that opens up the ability to explore and to see how one skill set transfers to another.
Mhm.
So, what are you multi passionate about, my friend?
Well, I just wanted to say that it was so beautiful to just watch you move from kind of being what would I say? I watched you kind of go from a place of unempowerment to empowerment around this introduction, like being in a place where you would question, well, I'm into this and this, and even as you were just describing it, it felt, it just didn't feel empowered. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's really what you've brought into my life is recognizing that we don't have to have, it's not a bad thing to have a multiple answer to that
Mm-hmm.
question. It's actually a beautiful thing and a life affirming thing and a positive. It's a beautiful thing. So just watching you like own that, and be empowered about that. And so maybe we'll start asking each other those questions.
I love it. I love it. And I think for everyone I've seen who's starting to embrace this, it makes life so much easier.
Yeah.
Those simple introductions that can be kind of mortifying,
Mm-hmm.
and you lose confidence right at the beginning of the conversation, and it kind of shuts the conversation down, where instead it opens it up,
Mm-hmm.
because also our ego and our identity gets tied up in these things,
Mm-hmm.
and we should be able to have flexibility and resilience around those things. And I've met so many, especially in the movement world, so many athletes who their identity is so tied in behind, like, well, I'm a parkour guy, or I'm an ultra runner. Like, well, okay, you get injured or you age, and now you're not the highest, fastest. What's left for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because these invitations haven't been sent out
Yeah.
for being multi-passionate.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, I remember, following like Madonna's pop career. And she was like, oh, the reinvention. Why don't it was sure it should just be evolution and normal growth.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, positive aging is about opportunities for research, opportunities for more of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And, change with the changes is always a beautiful thing. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the things I'm aware of that I would consider you to be multi-passionate about, and feel free to add to this list because I haven't even really given you a proper introduction yet. So you do many things. And so you're a Tibetan Buddhist and have been since the age of 18. Is that right?
And I would say that I'm a student of Tibetan Buddhism.
Uh-huh. So
Yeah.
I'm going to let you introduce the many things you do, because I have a list and I'll be like, oh, what about that? What about that? So
Yeah. I'm being really we're all growing and evolving so much, now. And so, I'm not Tibetan.
you're
pretty obvious. So, yeah, that my proper introduction is I have been a practitioner, a student of Tibetan Buddhism since I was 20. So
Mhm.
that's about 35 years now. Yeah, very fortunate to be introduced to it really young in my life. So
And
yeah.
what other things are you passionate about?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the off-road race car, off-road racing, and that was something, I owe a lot of my one of my personal mantras is to always stay open and curious, you know, and I really actually have to give a lot of credit to my ancestors and my family. My grandparents were travelers, campers, boater, they went out boating, they water skied, they built their own homes and their own gardens, and just very my grandmother got her high school diploma, I think at the age of 60.
Beautiful.
Just like really like wanting to follow through with getting that, which was an amazing thing to watch as a little kid. And my grandmother was a riveter for I think it was the shipyards, just very a volunteer, just always very active. And my dad kind of carried the mantle of all that. My dad was a race car driver. He raced motorcycles. He kayaked. He hiked. He camped. He was always taking lessons. Every time I talked to him, he was taking Spanish lessons or guitar lessons or cooking lessons. So my dad was just very active himself and was always introducing snow skiing and scuba diving and traveling to us as kids. So, I just owe so much of that imprinting and those possibilities to how I was raised. And my dad used to say all the time, he had a couple of phrases that are my favorites, carpe diem, seize the
Mhm.
day, right? He would say that all the time, which is an interesting um, quote, because if you actually look at it, um, I think what it means is seize the day today with no regard to the future. And
Mm.
that's a little interesting for me because I actually seize the day because I'm aware of the future.
Mhm.
As an end of life coach, that's been some of my deepest the consequences of studying end of life and learning about having a practice of impermanence in my life is that the end of my life or the acknowledgement that life is short is what motivates me actually to seize the day. It's my motivator. So I thought that was, I think that's interesting. But my dad used to say that all the time, seize the day. And he also used to say, this is the best of all possible worlds, Rhonda.
Oh, that's a nice one.
So, so live it, like really know it and be grateful. And so those mantras have lingered in my mind. And so I think growing up as a kid, I just learned that it was really exciting to figure out how I could challenge myself. What could I do to challenge myself? What was could I do this? Could I do that? And that's kind of been a theme, I would say, throughout my life, whether it's could I get into this college? Could I and then having I do have two children going into the births of my children. Can I face this? Do I have what it takes to be present and alert and to surrender? Like it's this interesting mix between showing up and just seeing if I could bear it, if I could be with it, if I could move through it. So it's this tension between kind of an intention of with some amount of preparedness, but also surrendering, to this momentum that I think just moves through us. So fortunately for me, I've had a lot of momentum.
And I also know from traveling with you that you're someone who's very easygoing in terms of go with the flow.
Mm.
of I think there was a phrase you used one time when, it's like those decisions when you're going somewhere. It's like, oh, should we eat here or stop there or do this? And you were like, I'm beautifully indifferent or something like that. And this level of kind of impermanence and flow that you operate from and within and reflect. And the presence of now is something, as I'm someone who knows very, very little of and about Tibetan Buddhism, and I really enjoy learning and discovering it through knowing you. And these kind of flow states that I've seen, particularly in parkour and spending time in the ocean and things like that, seem to really all go to this kind of oneness and flow and impermanence of things aren't fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really love that. And so you mentioned there that you're an end of life coach. So can you explain what that is and how and why you got into that?
Oh, sure. Well, certainly it arose from the blessings of my teacher and having met my teacher at such a young age. As a matter of fact, my very first gift from my teacher was a book on the Bardos, which is a book all about how to die. You can actually learn how to die. That dying is an active process that we can learn about it. We can we can rehearse it. We can and by doing that, it won't, I was just thinking about this because this is a big topic right now. Like this is really trending right now with death and dying, and I can feel the tension, between preparing for dying and surrendering to die. So I just wanted to throw this here in the mix a little bit that I got to thinking about snow skiing, for example. If you felt like you were going to go participate in snow skiing, you might not want to just show up at the top of the mountain, in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and try to get down the snow mountain. I mean, I think you're going to be too distracted with the fact that you're cold.
Yeah.
Number one, right? You're going to be so distracted with being cold, you're not going to be able to, you might not even get started. Like you actually might just stand there, in the distraction of the intense cold. Or if you're headed down, you don't have the proper equipment, you might not experience what it is to ski, right? You might just crash or fall over or skid or just not make it down the hill. So my position on to answer your question around death and dying is I just I'm really exploring out loud how we can be prepared, how we can have more death education, how we can understand the processes of dying, how we can explore what people may have shared in our wisdom traditions about what to expect with dying, no matter what your denomination, so that when you go through the experience, you are not distracted, in shocking ways, of you could have prepared just a bit, just like snow skiing, maybe having on a nice jacket, right? Or having really nice equipment so that you can. So I don't know how good that analogy is, but it's an interesting viral conversation. So I stand in the place of, as an end of life coach, I work with people to imagine or plan or discuss or begin having conversation about what death means to you and what's coming up for you about it, so that you can make some plans that might be in alignment with your practices, that might be in alignment with your values, that might be in alignment with your aspirations for what you would hope the end of your life might look like. So I love spending time in that aspect of the journey. death education, resourcing up, um, healing those things in advance so that you're not having an avalanche of woundedness or fears come up, right in the end. I mean, as we go into our dying, our bandwidths get very small for many, many reasons. And so if we've maybe cleared some of those spaces well in advance, maybe there'll be some more space and openness for just being present to the dying itself. Then I spend a lot of time in the active dying phase. Anything from being present to dying to creating vigil circles where people can be present for those. We don't die alone. we it requires community. It really does. Unless you're someone who wants to walk off into the dark of night and do it all by yourself, there's those people too that enjoy that. But typically what we see is we die in the presence of companions. And we're a pretty death illiterate culture. And so it's hard for people to show up to those moments and companion someone if you haven't thought about it and talked about it and explored it and considered all the options about it, or your own preferences about it. Who you want to be, who do you want to be when someone's dying? So there's the act of dying and what that, everything that entails. And then there's the following death. And how do we grieve? And what does that look like? So in my personal opinion, I have found, and I can only speak from my own experience, but I just find that when we have ways to engage, when we have rituals, when we have ideas of how to move and express our heartbrokenness, that connection, that community can really serve as we're healing. So yeah.
I mean, thank you, because as you say, I mean, in general, society has a very head in the sand approach to any discussion around death and dying. And I remember, I think I must have been in my early 20s and meeting my sister and my mum and dad for lunch, and they wanted to sit down and talk to us. And they wanted to talk to us about their wills. And 21, 22-year-old version of me was like, no, that's so depressing. Oh my God, like I'm not going to talk about it. Like I didn't want to listen because my own emotional immaturity and the concept of this is my mum and dad and they want to talk to me about dying. And now in reflection, I'm like, after seeing people who had no idea of what was going to happen when one of their parents was no longer with us, when they've gone through that loss, there's this kind of logistical chaos. And for that, on top of this heartbroken loss, was like, oh shit, I'm so glad my mum and dad had that conversation with me. I didn't want to hear it. And I didn't know how to have the conversation. And I think that, when we get to our ages, when we're in our 50s, we're in midlife, we've all experienced loss. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a boy I went to primary school with, and we knew he had something in his heart. There was always something about, like, there was some days he couldn't do PE and there was something, and he died. And when you're, 9 years old, I'm not in a conflict zone. I'm in the security and warmth of middle class Southwest England, and it was so shocking that he didn't come to school anymore. And it was like, oh. And then moments remembering like the news that my grandfather had died, and my parents kind of hid their emotions from us to kind of I guess in a protective vein is how I'm guessing they kind of did that, or we all express things in different ways. So this idea, and even when I've said to people like there's so much in this in terms of there is the topic itself, and then so even the idea of like when I said to one friend like, oh, we're doing this, and oh, my friend Rhonda's coming, and they're like, oh, she's amazing, and this and that, and like she works with like death and dying, and they were like, oh God, that sounds really depressing. And I was like, oh no, Rhonda's the most fun person you'll meet. And that to some people is the biggest contradiction that so how do you kind of begin? Where does one begin in the inevitability, the loss, which we're all going to go through? And is it helping that there are no discussions? Is it helping anyone that there's no vocabulary? Or do we all just go into a free fall, suck it up, suck it in? And like how does one even begin? Because
Yeah.
I know I've benefited so much from being in conversation with you when I experienced a parent dying, and then recently when a friend lost one of their parents very suddenly, and the conversations we've had, I've never heard anywhere, and I feel that this inevitability, the only certainty is that there's this one, the how, the when, the why, those are all kind of additions to that, but there will be loss.
Mm-hmm.
And being on the top of the mountain without the jacket, it's like when I see people who say they want to surf but they don't know how to swim, I'm like, you have no business going out there. Like, it's not going to go well. Like, oh, you're going for a 30-mile hike and you didn't check the weather. You're not setting yourself up for success.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where our worlds have really complemented and coincide is this notion that is very new to me, because I'm no different than most people who don't spend their time thinking about loss and grief, although we all have it in our lives, that how we live is going to affect how we die. Mm-hmm. And to live well is to die well, and this connection between the two. And what you've brought to my limited and growing understanding is these moments of celebration and story and understanding. In the same way, when perimenopause happened to me, well, no one had sat me down and talked to me about perimenopause and, oh, these are the wonderful things that estrogen's going to do. And when you don't have so much, this might happen. And then suddenly something's happening and you're going, I don't understand what's happening. So, yeah, like where do you start with people? Because I know you deal with everything from you go to the hospitals and you help a family understand what the options are. You can be at someone's bedside. You're the person who actually, is on the end of a call of the parent whose teenager has suddenly died in a motorbike accident. So the skill and the compassion and this expanse of life experiences, because end of life can happen at any moment, at any time. So I don't even know, that's not even a question. I'm just like, this is the beginning of like, this is how much, I think that just exposes that there is a desert and a starvation, this lack of, where do we start in such a deficiency?
I know, I think I heard about 17 things in that.
Oh, unpack it all.
Might have to do a 3-part podcast. I don't know.
That's all good.
First of all, I don't know where, first I want to be really careful in our conversation today that I am really exploring this idea of setting ourselves up for success for dying. That in itself is very loaded.
I want to die well. If I get a choice, I want to die well.
I know. And so I'll move to that too. Like, what does it mean to die well? That's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Right there. So I think that these expressions of dying well are kind of be, they're trending, but what do we really mean by that? And I think everyone's trying to sort that out. I'm living in this death space all day, every day. I live, breathe. I'm obsessed with exploring what is it that everyone's speaking into, and so just that, setting ourselves up for success. And I just use this metaphor of snow skiing. You just wouldn't want to go on a black diamond run and be at the top of the hill with like no jacket and no goggles, and like it's just not going to go well. But then what does that mean, right? Well, I mean, maybe you'll just tumble down the hill, and maybe that's not so bad, right? So it's such a profound exploration, really. So I invite all your listeners to really be thinking about this. Like, what does it mean to die well for your, and I think maybe we would all have a very different answer, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the beginning of what would it mean to you? What would it mean to you to die well? How would you set yourself up for success for dying? I mean, dying will have its own agenda, too. It's a part of us that it's all, I can only imagine that it might be something like giving birth. We can have a birth plan and lots of intentions and deliberate plans and aspirations for what a good birth would look like. And we know that at some point the birth has its way with you and you surrender. And so I think I'm always a little more interested in what does it take? What does it take to surrender to something more powerful than yourself? What is it? What is are we prepared to relinquish all control? Are we are we prepared to go into the unknown? And what does it take to go into the unknown? Maybe we're going to struggle like hell while we're dying and refuse to let go. Actually, when it actually happens, I mean, we can talk all day long about, even myself, I would hope that I can be in a state of open awareness and allowing and flowing to, I don't know that when that hour is dawning, something doesn't arise in me that will absolutely refuse to die. I don't know, we don't know, but we can certainly be thinking about it and talking about it, because in our culture we do none of that, not really. I mean, I feel like death and dying is trending a little bit more than maybe it has in a long time, but we can be thinking about it. I wanted to go back when you were talking about being a child with your parents wanting to have this conversation. I just have so much compassion for you, really, because all of us, we're not living in a culture where this conversation is the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Where this conversation, it's not like we've so relegated it to other people, to take care of the messy details when it comes to death and dying, that we don't, we're not inheriting experience and exposure and language around death and dying. So if we don't have any patterns for it, if we don't have any imprints, if we don't have any memories of it, that we've seen it, we've digested it, oh yeah, I've been doing this over and over again. Of course we're bereft of what to say. Of course it feels scary. So I just want to honor that, you're not alone. That's there's a lot of avoidant, checked out, withdrawal, and again, I say that with compassion. It requires language, it requires, that's what you hear that so much in the death and the, death circles is, I don't know what to say.
Mm-hmm.
Someone calls and says that their husband just died. I don't know what to say. And it's like, of course you don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. We're not cultivating this language because we're, first, yeah. So I can appreciate that. So those were a couple of things.
Oh, I bombarded you,
Yeah.
and like just what comes up in that for me is also the memory of, um, I always thought like there's just this connection. Like if someone says the word death, what do I think? I just think depressing. So you're not drawn to this topic, and then we go through life and we have these losses. And then for me, it was very profound when I was actually with my uncle when he passed, when he took his last breath, and we weren't expecting it to be his last breath. And it was actually incredible. It was very sad, and I wish I'd had more time, and he'd been in better health, and all of these different things. No, and I think this is maybe the part that's difficult, that we don't have words and phrases around, because I mean, it sounds so callous to say it was so great to the the difference between saying it was so great to be there with him, or I felt really honored
Mm-hmm.
that I got to witness his last breaths, even though I didn't really understand what was happening in those last breaths. He was in hospital at the time, and he had a do not resuscitate, and it was all very clear. Um, and yet to say I'm glad he died is so different than I'm glad I was with him at that time. And the difference of I'm sad he's no longer with us
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make any, but there are these black holes around what it is to now live a new way without that person physically here with us.
And I would add to what he gave you in his dying.
It was, I mean, I'll cry now thinking about it.
I know.
Like to, and what was incredible was how quickly he went cold. It was like, wow, not many breaths had passed, like in time. And it was like, wow. And he was there. And then he wasn't, and I was still there, and he was still physically there. And it was extraordinary.
You
And
know,
I
one of
know,
yeah, I one of my greatest teachers just was sharing us some song lyrics, and the lyrics were about when we're present to someone dying. This I don't know if it was Leonard Cohen, but anyway, the song is about how the person moved through their own body in their dying. And so
mm-hmm.
as you're sharing this, I'm just imagining your uncle, he moved through you.
Oh, he did. He did.
Yeah.
And also I think when my dad passed, there were kind of 10 days where I don't think I've ever felt so much love in my life. Like it was a very, and we all grieve differently, and this was just my experience of it, was that I was very quiet, and I didn't really want to see anyone. My mum and my sister, and my dad had gone through a very prolonged period of ill health, of a frontal lobe dementia. Nothing was going to get better. His quality of life had become very small from everything that he had lived well doing. And my mum was very chatty, and I was very very quiet. And yet at the same time, I felt kind of like an Amazonian superwoman. I felt nothing was impossible for me in my life. I felt this love, and I have quite a few friends who are nurses and first responders, and actually two friends who are both firemen. The first day on the job after training, they both were part or were called to the scene of a fatal car accident, and they were the ones who were next to the person who had their last breath. And so, you know, as we go through life, there are people like me who, you know, we have family members, or we hear about neighbors or a friend's partner. During COVID, a lot of people had a lot more, you know, like the mortality rates this and the numbers of this, and a lot of people know someone who passed. That where was I going with this? But yeah, other people are dealing with this in a very regular basis. You operate in this death and dying world, and death circles and grief and grieving, and then there's other people who are on you know, the other scale of it. I know friends who are involved in like ice climbing and very deep scuba diving, and they know, they're just like, well, it's not an if, it's kind of a when. You know, most of your friends are gonna not make it, or not live to these ages if they continue doing these activities. So what do you say when someone phones you and says so and so's passed? Instead of saying, I mean, for me, I think even saying I don't know what to say is still saying something. Beyond, and there is a kind of clumsiness which a lot of us kind of feel around that. So I'm just curious, like where can we start? Where does it start with that?
Well, so now I have two things I want to answer. The conversation on the phone, and then I wanted to circle back to when you were talking about people wanting to protect the children or protect someone. Maybe I'll just say that really quickly, because you mentioned that when you were talking, you said there's this idea that we want to protect. But can you imagine if I said to you, I want to protect you from this experience with your uncle?
I'd be like, who the hell are you? No, it's my uncle. It's ours. No, 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 like, no. I'd be having none of it. Yeah.
So that's not to say I don't want to be misunderstood to say that there's elements of emotional maturity and
Sure.
what people can bear and that sort of thing. But I want to just say more generally, I'm just curious about this idea that we want to protect each other from the nourishment and the beauty and the bliss of participating in the whole cycle of life, even as children. Yeah. Because the reason I'll go back in, the reason that you felt void of how to be with your parents is because you had missed all these opportunities to be groomed, to be curated, to be nourished by the deaths that had preceded that moment.
Agreed. Yeah. And like, I know for a lot of people, like I had cats growing up, but I never had a pet that died when I was young. And I know for a lot of people, that's their child or their own experiences of the first experience of loss and grieving, whether it's a gerbil or a dog or you know, whatever it is, that there is that attachment and love to this other living creature. And I didn't have that. My cats were, I was in my like mid-20s, I think, when my cats were old. Like good Brazilian farm cats. They were they both had very long lives, which was wonderful for me. So yeah, I think and what made the similarity with what you're saying there is in the same way through the parkour world, where we talk about exposing children to risk and danger. And this assessment of if you try and protect and, wrap someone in cotton wool,
Yeah.
away from challenge and risk, do they are going to face risk and challenge in life. So are we preparing them to deal with it, or is it just going to be a first time, holy crap, what the hell's going on? And I feel this similarity, these parallels in this lack of preparedness around an inevitable event.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's interesting that you bring up pets as children, because I can remember being, I think I was, I don't know, I was somewhere between maybe 8 and 10 years old. And my mother raised poodles, little toy poodles. And I remember our patriarchal poodle died. And I knew he was dying. I knew that he probably had died. But then I suddenly was, I was kind of told to go to my room. And I remember going to my bedroom and I remember looking at my window, and it was one of these gray days. It was probably like looking out over the moors of England.
Mm-hmm.
It was gray and there was fog outside. And in the distance, I could see a tree and I could see my dad with a shovel, you know, uh, digging a hole. And there I was in the window, so far from this tree and this my father, right, digging a hole, and so quiet, like, and no, if I could do it all again, right, if I could rewrite the script, it would have been an amazing thing for my parents to have me come out and be with Tiger, our little poodle, and to help carry Tiger out to the backyard and maybe to help dig, and say my goodbyes and maybe throw in his collar and, all those things as a child. Like, I wanted to be a part of my family and our family's rituals. And so that's my, that's how I can really relate that, just how interesting it is that, the avoidant, wanting to protect the children. And quite frankly, children know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's even a double bind, because the children know what's happening, but no one's talking to them about it, or everyone's pretending like nothing's happening. And it's these are really beautiful, beautiful conversations to think about out loud among each other. And really, what do we want to be? How do we want to integrate this cycle of life, even the end of life? And then you asked me, what do I say on the phone? And I have to confess, Julia, I'm learning about this myself. I'm just like you. I'm trying to figure out. I think some of the things that what come forward for me just very intuitively is, I will often, if someone calls me and it's very grave news, I will often start with, I'm right here. Like, please, just to establish a connection, just a really loving presence. So that's usually what comes forward for me very first. Just, I'm right here. Or I'm fine. I really want to be with you right here, right now. And so, just establishing that groundedness, that rootedness. And then I usually will move into what's happening, because it's kind of an interesting thing. People will call and say someone has died, and we can make a lot of assumptions, and it's just, that doesn't go over very well. You might assume that they're very sad and they're really not.
Mm-hmm.
You might
Yeah.
assume that they're relieved and they're not. You might assume that they're exhausted and broken and they're not. Right. So you just, I guess what I have found maybe works the best is just make no assumptions whatsoever about what's happening for this person, and just ask,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And usually, if you get that far, and the person's able to share, I always do my best to just, I don't want to burden them. That if they're calling with a grave loss, the last thing they need is to have another burden, right? So I think in our illiteracy, a lot of times people might respond in a way that can feel a little burdensome. And it's not our fault, right? It's not our fault. It's because we just don't have practice and patterns and ideas and resources. And so, you might say something like, I can't think of anything right now, but you can only imagine that there's responses where you would take the attention off the caller, and now they're having to attend to you. So I try to be very, very careful that, if someone's in a grave, sharing very upsetting news, my commitment is to be completely available to them, and open and curious and allowing for them to be in whatever space they're in, and share it with someone, because they're obviously calling you, reaching out, which is a whole nother thing for someone to even reach out. That's very, very, very hard. And we have a common response in our culture to say, I love you. Please let me know if you need anything. And again, that kind of puts the burden back on the caller. Now they have to reach out, So I think another ways I might kind of approach that is, I'm here for you. I'll be checking in with you, or I would like to call you tomorrow and see how you are, or what, everyone gets a feel for what's really called for in the moment, but to really make it, anyway, we have a habit of burden, I'm compassionately aware we have a habit of burdening the other person without realizing it.
Yeah. I think that the polite phrases are, they're said with good intent.
Yeah.
Without an awareness around, like, well, they'll contact me when they need me, or, because the person's my experience and what I've seen of others, which is actually gratefully so far, like I've actually had very few losses close to me, that you're in this kind of free fall. And what struck me was there's a lot to do. And you're in the least emotionally capable state to attend to many of the things and to know what the options are. And it's the lack of preparedness. Like you're on the top of the mountain, or your friends at the top of the mountain without their jacket. It hasn't gone well. And now you've got to go to the mountain, and you don't have a jacket, and you don't know the protocol. You don't know what to do. You don't know the options. And you're trying to figure it out whilst walking through life in this daze, this kind of aftershock. It's like an emotional aftershock. And I remember describing it to a friend, like, it's as though this person were an anchor in your life, and you kind of knew it, but you didn't really feel it. And now suddenly that anchor is moved, and the rest of the world is just going on, doing its day, and you're very happy for them, but you're moving in slow motion because you're trying to reroute yourself in the world without the anchor. And yet there are all these demands. You have to make decisions, and making decisions from a very highly emotional state is and you really want to make these decisions right. And then I remember like having to write a eulogy and make decisions about flowers and ceremonies and invites and calling. And it was like, that was worse. That was a bigger demand than being in the hospital with the person who passed. This, the follow-up. I had no education. I'd never dealt with a funeral director. What were the questions? What were the answers? What were the choices? And they were wonderful people, and they kind of guide you through it. But what can we do? Because I know this is so Peacefully Prepared is the name of your business.
Yeah.
And what an apt, beautiful, like it. does what it says. Like it's so beautiful. So can you share some of those things and what that really involves or can involve?
Yeah, I mean, what you're speaking about with these logistics is how can we plan ahead as an act of kindness for
Yeah.
those who are going to attend to our dying and to our death care, because there will be a lot of things to decide. And so I work from what's called a spiritual care directive. It's a beautiful document that invites you. It has prompts to really invite you to fill out a lot of these details. A lot of these details, because a lot of times we're spending a lot of time trying to tune in to what the person would have loved. I mean,
Mhm.
that's just natural. And so I've had the absolute blessing to see we've had three dear friends just in this last year go through their dying with a spiritual care directive, and the grace and the resources that were all laid out um, just gave such guidance, and because even when you're trying to figure it out for a person, there's just tension and worry. Am I doing it right? Is it what they would have liked? And there's that level. And then there's the level that because we're such a death illiterate culture, we don't even know who our funeral directors are or our local mortuaries. So we're looking through the yellow pages. I mean, I know that's an old statement. We don't
Mhm.
really
No,
have
no, no,
yellow pages
I'm
anymore.
with you. Yeah.
But and that's kind of what happened to me with my mom, because I walked with my mom who had breast cancer. I walked her to the end of her life, and it was kind of before I really launched Peacefully Prepared. And, I'll never forget the night that they said, we think she'll transition in the morning. So they said, so who's your mortuary? And I thought, mortuary? I don't know. I never thought of a mortuary. Nobody in my family had thought about a mortuary. And so there I was at like 3 a.m. I'm tired. I'm heartbroken. I've been there already for 5 days, sleeping on a cot. And I'm looking through the yellow pages I don't know if do I want a big business? Do I want a mom and pop shop? Do I want to spend a lot of money? Do I want to get the most economical choice? What's in my area? Is there something green that I should be considering? It's just like, it was just too much. And trust me, when you're looking on Google or on the Yellow Pages, you're not getting a really full neutral description, of your services. So, I mean, that is just one small sliver of the heartache that I actually went through, and thinking to myself, this is something that could have been avoided, really, so easily. So in the spiritual care directive that I coach clients in completing, this 9-part, there's one piece that's about disposition of body and your funeral. And let's find that now,
Mhm.
right? Let's make those decisions now. I mean, a lot of people haven't even told their family whether they want to be cremated or buried.
Mhm.
Like, it's amazing.
Mhm.
It is amazing
There's no
how
discussion.
no
It's very
discussion.
rare that there's a
And so,
discussion.
okay, so let's say you've had the discussion, thankfully, that they've told you they wanted to be cremated. Well, now
Mhm.
there's a whole nother host of decisions.
Mhm.
Where do you want to be cremated? And do you want to go to a mortuary first? Do you want to go to direct cremation, meaning that you can go straight to the crematory? Like, there's so many. Do you want to be held at home for 3 days? Do you want to be held at home one day? There's just so many decisions we can make, and we have the opportunity. It doesn't take that long. I say that just 3 to 6 hours of planning can save your family up to 3 years
Wow.
of post-death confusion, lawsuit, and heartache, right?
That's
So I think we all can invest, and I always say you don't have to live in this chapter of planning for your death.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I always say, look, about 10 years ago, I created my spiritual care directive, and I leave it in a binder on my desk, and I don't live in it. I don't it's there, and my husband is fully resourced if something happens to me, and he's got all kinds of detail. That doesn't mean he is not going to go through the grief and the sadness and the heartbrokenness that would all be natural and letting me go, but at least he's not going to have what you just described, the post-death chaos,
Mm.
or I like to call it the shit show.
I think that's about right. I just remember like having to Google stuff and just being like, oh, hang on, like I've got to go where, and there's a death certificate, and then I've got to talk to this person. Oh, and you want me to sit and write the eulogy at home at the same time? And do you know
Yeah,
what I want to do? I want to go for a fucking walk on the moors and eat ice cream and cry my heart out. That's what
I
I want.
know. And I
Like
love that you're mentioning a eulogy, because that, again, that is something we can write in advance. We
that's
can write,
incredible to me. Yeah.
we can write our obituary, and I always say, and I lead a 9-week coaching program on your spiritual care directive. And when we're in this section, I say, if when you have to write an obituary for someone, it is very difficult for you to figure out where they went to high school and what year they graduated
Nightmare.
and how many times they've been married and all their children with their middle names and the adopted siblings. And like it people make mistakes, they hurt people's feelings, they don't get the details right, or it's just an incredible burden.
And
um
also what I've
yeah,
seen and experienced, it creates a lot of conflict in the family.
yeah,
I know a friend's family, and it got to the point where the siblings were actually not speaking to each other, and the dad was like, there's not even gonna be a funeral. Because that process became so
yeah,
emotionally loaded, and everyone brought their story to it.
yeah,
And it did all work out in the end, and there was a very, celebratory, honored
yeah,
funeral. But my God, in that lead up, it was like World War III broken out. And there is that, and everyone was like, God, Josie would have been turning in her grave if she could see like the way you two are acting, and da 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 da, and all those kind of things. Um, but yeah,
yeah.
to write your own eulogy.
I know it would take
Amazing.
you, it probably would take you 15 minutes to write down the details that maybe are meaning. Like some people don't want certain details. And like if you could literally on a piece of paper, probably in 15 minutes, write down what you would like in an obituary. Now, that doesn't mean your family can't write all the poetry and
Their
the
funny memories, the
love.
stories.
But
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the skeleton of some of the details that people can spend up to 2 days
Oh
trying to
yeah, I
figure
easily
out.
did. For my
Yeah.
uncle, it was it
You,
was it was days.
yeah. I have written many obituaries as an offering to people, and it is very challenging. It's very challenging. One of the things I want to say into this aspect, because I think it's really interesting, is again, I'm always between this tension of we can leave resources as an act of kindness to
Mhm.
help, but also because I just used the word where I said I didn't, I'm trying to avoid being too much of a burden. And what I just want to say about that also is it's okay to be a burden.
Mhm.
It's okay. And I think that's another issue that's coming up for a lot of people. I know that people bring this to my coaching program a lot. They'll say, I don't want to write a spiritual care directive because I don't want to have a bunch of preferences and wishes that my kids will be burdened to then carry out.
I mean, if you're asking for I don't know, a flying carpet and decorating
Yeah.
on the high street, maybe, but I'm guessing
Yeah.
most people don't.
I mean, I love having this conversation and really exploring what it means to be a burden,
Mhm.
because it's good to know wishes and preferences and instructions can lighten the load for sure. And also, there's something really beautiful in being a burden to your family. when your life is ending. I mean, there's a part of me that wants to say, what else is worth holding than the burden of caring for, and that, because that comes up a lot. People will say, I don't want to ask my daughter to come to my bedside while I'm dying because that would just be a burden for her. But we've already talked today in this conversation, is it a burden or is it a blessing?
Mm-hmm.
What else is worth showing up for, but to show up for your mom in her act of dying? Anyway, it's just another, so I wanted to be really careful with that word. I feel very, I want to make sure it's balanced, that, we want to alleviate, like, maybe, and are there necessary or unnecessary stressors? I mean, again, you could look into that, but I think there is something about empowering your family in some aspects, and then also letting go and knowing that the burden of caring for your family and friends is one of the most, it's one of the greatest honors
Mm-hmm.
of our lives
Yeah.
too. So, yeah.
And what do you think so I see so many parallels in how you approach this subject with how you approach other things in your life. So, this, the spiritual care plan, which is, and you have, am I right? You have one that's both or can you just share a
Yeah,
little bit more about what
I have two strong spiritual care directives. One is for the Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, or Buddhism, I should say. My background is more of a Tibetan Buddhist background, but it's a little bit more geared for the details and the practices and the kind of the ways in which Buddhism might approach death. So I have what I call a Buddhist plan for the time of dying, spiritual care directive. And then I also have the spiritual care directive that's more non-denominational, more that could be applied for anyone of faith. And quite frankly, could even be applied if you don't have faith.
Mhm.
So yeah. Yeah.
Prepared is prepared.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think. And also, what I love is that through our conversations, I know you're very passionate about kind of a lot of myth busting around death and dying. This idea of, the two things come to mind from previous conversations are one is about, like, holding their hand,
Mm-hmm.
and one is about wanting to keep giving them water and food.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think my latest one too is how we feel about suffering.
Oh yeah, let's go there. Let's talk about that.
Yeah,
That's a
so
good one.
it's a really common thing that I think it's a cultural kind of a cultural myth that everyone wants their hand held. And I think that's the beauty of doing a spiritual care directive, because there might be circumstances or people might have certain preferences that holding the hand might not be their greatest wish. And I mean, just to speak into that a little bit, for example, there are some ideas that when we go into, say, the last 2 days before we're dying, maybe, if you can kind of gauge it, some people would like to kind of finalize their, almost have like a social goodbye, so that they can then kind of begin to really turn inward and begin showing up for this active dying that will, quite frankly, probably occupy most of our ability, especially at that time when our bandwidth is very limited, due to pain and medications and fears. And so in the wanting to turn inward, there's many people that want to kind of cocoon and kind of go inward, and might even have beliefs that their body is dissolving and unwinding, and that their awareness or consciousness is kind of descending very deeply into their body, preparing to leave the body, let's say. And so holding their hand would be kind of bringing their awareness back into their hands. And so in just a very loving and compassionate, request, that might come up. So having a spiritual care directive, if someone's filled one out and it's really meaningful for them and you're able to read it, you could see, some people want to be held. They want you to climb into bed with them. They want foot massage. And other people, maybe they don't want to be touched,
Leave me
you
alone.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's I think again it's about expressing your own preferences. When it comes to eating in this culture, we know that offering food is one of our biggest love languages. We go out to eat very often in social interaction and we cook food together. I mean, it's just such a love language. And yet we know, when you look at death and dying, especially again, those last maybe 3 days, if you are experiencing a progressive dying, in the last, when we begin to lose our appetite, when we begin to refuse food, a lot of times you might find situations where the family still wants to encourage food. But, we just like to talk about, I love having the conversation that maybe, just maybe, the body is naturally not having an appetite anymore. And that those energies that would normally go for digestion are now being used for pain management and other functions that are really becoming more predominant, as we're dying. And so just tuning in and observing, observing yourself, but also, so people will put that in their spiritual care directive. If I begin refusing food, please know that I'm not rejecting you, and I'm not, it's just that I'm having a natural experience of that's not important anymore, the food. And suffering, that's a really big one. I see so many articles and people talking and holding space about, and I'm tuning into this for myself too. We just don't want anyone to suffer. We don't want anyone to suffer. And my exploration right now is there merit in suffering? You know, how does each person feel about suffering? How do we manage suffering? What resources do we access when we're suffering? Is there any possibility of reframing the suffering? We're seeing a little more articles and science and research coming out that we can take a painful feeling, and if we really sit and look directly into it, I mean, this has been taught to us for 2,000 years. If we really look into it, the pain changes from pain to sensation, and that we can actually change our relationship to pain. So some people that are very, very, there's just many different spiritual beliefs around suffering. Some might consider that suffering is a way of offering to all beings, or paying off old debts in some way for your life, or there's just many contexts. And so I'm enjoying looking into how we can evolve or deepen our understanding of suffering and how you manage it in your life. And so the beauty of that is if we're inspired to think about managing our suffering at the end of life, it invites us to think about how to manage our suffering today, because we
100%.
face suffering all day long in various ways, because things are always changing. So how do we manage suffering right now? How do we manage disappointment right now? And to be just really looking into that for ourselves.
One of the other things I wanted to bring up, and then we're going to move on to some other topics around racing and driving fast and going out in the desert and the love of the Baja Peninsula. There's something that you've said in conversation that was new to me, that I'd never heard kind of before, because again, most people aren't around. Like, I'm lucky to know you and both Laurie, who are death and dying end of life coaches and grief coaches. That this idea, especially when someone doesn't get to be elderly, that their life was taken too soon, and that a phrase you said is, well, what if their life was complete?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of blew my mind
Mm-hmm.
against all convention of what we wish for other people
Mm-hmm.
and what happens. And, you know, and I'm also, I'm very interested in the difference as well between health span and lifespan of how we spend our days and how we spend our life. And, it's the years in the age, not the age of the years, or and as we said, some people, what's their idea of dying well? For some, it could be out in a blaze of glory. Like, I know a friend who's just like, I just want to ski, and then, I'll probably die in an accident that's da 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 da. And he says it very openly. And then other people are like, I just want to go in my sleep. I don't know. I just want to go to bed, and I don't want to know about it. I don't know. So this idea, if you can just speak to this idea of what if, I know I'm really like going there with this, or you don't have to, but it was just such a mind-blowing thing that you said
Mm-hmm.
of, well, what if? And it's always like, yeah, but what if? This curiosity of, well, what if?
Mm-hmm.
So what if?
I think that's kind of rooted um in my practice, my little practice, what I've been able to accomplish in this lifetime, that I'm always kind of trying to pay attention to not arguing with reality. That things are happening. And how can we just be present in a way that allows and accepts, or I don't know. It's a tough one, but I think that's kind of the root of it. Um, when you have someone who's dying at a younger age, I mean, first of all, that is just extremely difficult. I mean, there's the gravity, the gravity of that is lost on most people, actually. You know, I don't think I really have deep, deep, almost unbearable compassion for people that lose young children, because the gravity is something I don't think any of us understand. So I have to say that first. It's incredibly humbling, and um, I think alongside my deep belief that what can we do to be present to what's happening, is I cultivate a belief as frequently as I can that we're safe, that we're always safe, that we're connected, and that there is some part of us, whether it's what you'd call your wakefulness, your awareness, there's some part of us that's actually never been born and never dies. Right now it's awake, looking out my eyes, looking at you. And that, for right now it's here, but things always change. And so we don't know if it'll be here in the next moment. And for some people, it happens, it just happens at different moments on that lifeline. So yeah, it's a tough topic, but there's some part of me that doesn't want to diminish the person just because their life was shorter than the 80 or 90-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some element about refusing to diminish a life at any point.
Mm-hmm.
to not hold it up as just full and beautiful and complete, not for them and for myself too.
Yeah. I have a friend who lost her teenage son, and yet the impact that he had in his number of years,
Yeah.
regardless of whether he will, on the one hand, there's the conversation of, well, he never got to graduate college, he never got to marry, he never got to da 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 da. But the impact he had on the lives and of those around him was can never be diminished,
Yeah.
or denied. So I think it's a beautiful way to see that,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
I think is wonderful. We're going to circle back death and dying a little
Okay.
bit more at the end, but I want to make sure we have time.
Okay.
So you're a traveler.
Ah.
You've traveled.
Mm.
And was this kind of love of travel, or like how did you get into that, as well as kind of honoring your ancestors? But did it coincide with this curiosity around finding and maintaining and being a student of Tibetan Buddhism?
Mm-hmm.
How did these stories start? Did
Mm-hmm.
they align as part of a story together?
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was really, really young, my grandmother she used to always say to me, "You got to go see the world." She used to say it all
Nice.
the time, "You got to go see the world." So I think it was, again, like this really deep imprint, um, to go places and see things. My dad was amazing in that he wanted to be a pioneer. He wanted to go to places no one had ever been before. So he would pack us up in this truck that was this ambulance. I mean, talk about like early adopter on the outfitting a car to be like
And nice.
a van life. My dad was doing that in the 70s.
Yep.
So he bought this old Navy ambulance and he outfitted it, as a camper, and he would pack us in this ambulance and we'd go south of the border, and at the time we'd go all the way down to San Felipe, and then south of San Felipe was just dirt,
Mm-hmm.
and he would drive us on these dirt roads. I think it would take us like 2 days sometimes to
Mm-hmm.
get all the way down to a place called Gonzaga Bay. And
Oh.
we'd come up over the hill and down into this bay, and for him it was like a Shangri-La.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to go to this place that no one could get to, and it was true at the time. Would no one would venture out like that. So that those made deep, deep impressions. And then yeah, in college, I just my devotion for my Buddhist path was really emerging, and I just knew I had to go to Kathmandu, Nepal, and look for a teacher. It was just um, this impulse that I don't. So you can't understand these things sometimes, in life. We're just drawn so deeply. Can't really take credit for it other than I said yes, and so grateful that I did. So after college, a girlfriend and I really have to say again, it was her doing. I had a girlfriend reach out to me and with a grant and say, let's go study overseas. And I thought that was a great idea. And we ended up traveling for a year together with backpacks and went around the globe, stopping in many, many, many places together, and also studying for 6 months in China. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of always been kind of a manifester. I think that's like in my human design, for the different types of people, but just setting my mind to something also. Like I have all these blessings and all these incredible invitations, and then also kind of setting my mind to certain things and using visuals or mantras or affirmations. I wanted to have a healing arts center here in Pacific Beach, and ended up being a tenant in the building. But right away, I thought I would love someday to own this piece of property. So I ended up, this was back in the 90s. I took this panoramic picture of the property, which was a little bit before its time. We didn't even have iPhones yet, but I was able to develop this panoramic photo, and I put it on my altar. And when I was practicing every day, it was on my altar that I really wanted to own. I really have a belief that what we think about and what we invest our energy and thoughts and wishes like regularly, like over, really, really commit to it. I have this, I guess, secret belief that it really does, it does affect reality. At least I've seen that in my life. Because I had no business buying this property at the time.
And now you own it, and
I was broke. I had no credit. I had no savings. I was a woman. I was 27 years old. I had no business, but that, I tell you, I think that picture on my altar, I just prayed to it and kept calling it in and calling it in. And it took about 3 years, and you have to be patient. I think you have to be a little bit patient too, actually. I don't think things happen for me. They don't happen immediately, but so I exercise a little bit of a patience and diligence, just keep doing it. And before I knew it, I was getting an invitation to actually purchase this commercial building and ran a healing arts center here for 25 years. So that occupied a lot of my time. But I think people would find it strange, since my dad was a race car driver, and I was around race cars all the time. And so I just developed this, I wanted to manifest myself as a race car driver. That came forward, and I ended up getting to be the co-pilot to a race car driver for about 4 years. So we raced all the circuit races for about 4 years, and I was his co-pilot. And I just sat there and watched him drive, for years. And then one day he asked if I wanted to drive.
Yes.
And yeah. So again, just very patient, very diligent. Got to move into the driver's seat. And my family had incredible, as a family, we won our what you call our type
category?
of vehicle. Pardon?
Your category?
Yeah, we won our category, first place in the Baja 500. So we were very excited. And we did other races too that were very exciting as a family. And so people think, wow, you race cars and you like to go fast, as fast as I can.
You do go fast. I love it.
And then I'm sitting on cushions in my Buddha hall, sometimes for up to 6 to 8 hours at a spell. So yeah, I'm an interesting range.
And I mean, personally, I love that. And this really speaks back to this multi-passionate thing of, you can be passionate about racing cars in the desert and off-roading and all that entails, because so the Baja Peninsula, like there are so many people who live here in San Diego who have never been south of the border. That blows my mind. And I'm not even from here. So I was very curious, but I like to kind of travel and then you were brought up here. And something like, well, there aren't really proper roads beyond San Felipe. It was not an obstacle too big to surmount for your dad. He was a creative solution finder and adventurer. So you convert the ambulance, you put the kids in, you have 2 brothers, off you go. So I know, you guys were brought up with this love of the desert. And vehicles, and like, your daughter rides a motorbike, you like drive a razor, like it's amazing. And then we'll go on a girls' weekend, and you pull up in this enormous RV, towing a vehicle behind it, and then as we're driving, you go off road. It's like, okay, Rhonda, no, here we go. And this is. So a lot of people have these stereotyped ideas
Mm-hmm.
You're someone who practices Tibetan Buddhism, and you're an end of life coach. So
Mm-hmm.
you're just hippie woo woo, sitting on your cushions with your joss sticks, peace and love and
Mm-hmm.
light, doing beautiful work. And then people equally have this stereotype idea of you're some kind of crazy redneck racer,
Mm-hmm.
and that these two worlds cannot align, and they can be neither of those things that they identify as kind of shortcuts, stereotypes. And and in the same way, people people have said to me, well, God, you do so many different things. Like you do movement coaching and filmmaking and this and that and writing and academia, da 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 da. And I'm like, no, they're all the same.
Mm-hmm.
They're all the same. It's all creativity. It's all just about being creative and experiencing life and kind of thing. So, are you aware of what those commonalities are for you across your passions? And I kind of only was aware of it just because quite a few people at one point were just asking me. And I think when I started to also step into the place where I really owned all my passions, I would say, like, I'm an artist, I'm a movement coach,
Mm-hmm.
I'm an author,
Mm-hmm.
and I own all of them. And I think it's because I had to answer other people's questions. So I'm just curious as
Mm-hmm.
to whether you've had that conscious reflection of what type, other than you being you, what are the elements that you believe tie these experiences, or just what speaks to you doesn't aren't the options that most people put in the same strand. Like I remember there was a thing in the UK when you're um 16, you at the time I did my O levels and then it was going into A levels, and I wanted to do English literature, geography, and art. And for me, they were like, same. Like, it's all about the world, and I'm curious, and the world, and stories, and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
English literature, art, geography. And it was kind of like political geography. And I remember them saying, like, oh, you can't do those options. They were like, people don't do that. And I was like, what do you mean people don't do that? I was 16 and even more stubborn then, like full of attitude. And it was like, what do you mean people don't do that? And they were like, no. Most people who do English and art will also do um something else.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't do English, art, and geography. And I was like, wow. Or if you did art and geography, you did something. It was like this, my roll of the dice did not conform.
Mm-hmm.
It was very early on. I was told, no, you're square peg, this is a round hole.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't accept it. And I found a way around. And it ended up being, well, you can do this, but then you have to do that, but sign up for that one part-time. And it was really like, oh, computer says no. And I'm like, no. Let's write new code. Let's I just don't like there is a solution here. I'm not trying to get to the moon. I'm just trying to do these three subjects. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's expand how we think about it. So yeah, I'm curious what common traits
Mm-hmm.
or pulls and passion are embedded within all of your passions.
Mm-hmm. I think the being open and curious is a really big, like a big element of my life. Always wanting to stay open and curious. Always being willing to try new things. Um, there's some aspect of uh, wanting to see what something will ask of me, and if I can show up to it, and if I have the if I have the if I have what it takes, if I have the capacities, if I have the resilience or the strength, there's something um I whether it's racing cars or I have two children. I have two beautiful children, and when I was pregnant, I wanted to birth them at home. It was the same idea of I wanted to go into the experience and just see if I had what it took to be present to it, if I could trust that I could show up, which is interesting because we can apply that to even having a podcast.
If
Can
you're
I
gonna show up.
trust? Right. And so I'm finding, like, in my conversation with you, Julie, I'm really doing my best to just be as transparent and authentic, and really inviting myself to talk about what's on my mind in a way that, like, I don't even know if I have the answers, right? But these are the conversations I like to have, and this is where I'm going, and I'm looking for other people that want to keep taking them deeper and deeper. So, whether it's racing a car, same thing happens when you're racing a car. You're out in this experience that's, pretty much way over your head, quite frankly. And I mean, maybe not playing in the desert, but when you show up to race cars, um, you know, for a lot of people that take it very seriously, it's very risky. It's a very risky proposition. So you're showing up, you're way in over your head. Although I love that expression, because for a long time I used to say that and kind of feel bad about it. And I thought, I did this, and I was like, I'm in over my head, and when I did this, I thought, well, this is kind of where I feel that any connection I have to the great beyond, or to source, or to God, or to our spiritual wisdom mind, we kind of, in a Buddhist tradition, you exit the body through the head, you go out the crown, this is really our pathway, our connection to all that is, in an interesting way, beyond the physical body. So I say, well, I'm in over my head. I started to think, well, that's pretty cool. I actually like being in over my head. That'd be a good place to be, actually. So being in over my head, but trusting that I could show up in some way, and kind of learn as I go. So I would say that kind of has been a theme in my entrepreneurial pursuits, being an entrepreneur, having peacefully prepared, working on end of life coaching, very similar. Like, can I show up for this? Do I have what it takes? Can I go into the unknown? Can I be in over my head and still hold a space, even if it's unbearable, which it often is, right? It can be absolutely unbearable. And can I just witness myself and trust that I'm held and that I'm safe in a very deep and profound way. And I can in some way be prepared, and in some ways surrender, to the process. So I think that would some aspect of a thread.
I mean, I think those are really deep reflections beyond, my simplicity of like, oh, it's all creative. It's all same. I think this beautiful trust, adventurous self-compassion, openness. Like you're the epitome of the curious midlife woman who's multi-passionate. So I mean, I feel, well, thank you so much for your time today. And I feel these are conversations to be expanded upon and to continue, especially the work. Like, we didn't even touch into a whole bunch of the fun stuff either. But
I'm here for you, Julie. We can always do this again.
Yeah. So where can people find out more about the work you do with end of life, being peacefully prepared, your spiritual care plan? What's the next step for people? Where can they find out more?
Sure. If you want to reach out to me, go to, my website, peacefullyprepared.com. That would be one way to reach out to me. I'm also on Facebook. You can either find me by my name, which you can see on the screen, or you can find me at Peacefully Prepared.
And you have a course and you work with people one-to-one as well. Is that right?
I do one-on-one coaching for planning at any phase, whether it's the planning or your active phases of dying or your death care. And I have a course that I'll be starting in mid-February. So I'm very excited that I'll be putting together a group where we go through the spiritual care directive in 9 weeks. This one in mid-February will be for the Buddhist, and then I'll be putting another one on, for maybe a little bit later for more of a non-denominational platform.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have some Baja adventures coming up soon. We're going to go check out some whales. We're going to head down south. So I think maybe after that one, we jump on again.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm sure there'll be more questions coming in. So yeah, find Rhonda, find her work. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for the space you hold, your contribution to these experiences of life that we're all going through, and allowing us to prepare and discuss, and for being one of my fun coaches in life as well. So thank you so much, and check out Rhonda, and thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for listening to the show. Remember to subscribe and leave a review, and let me know what resonated, what you liked, what it brought up, what you're curious about, and what you would like to hear. You can go to julieangel.com and you will find a bunch of great free resources there. There is the free movement course, your free movement snacks guide, and if you are interested in reclaiming and increasing your physical strength and confidence so you can get your mojo back, be brave, adventurous, and age with grace, then message me via social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, or through my website, or email me at drjulieangel@gmail.com. That's drjulieangel@gmail.com, and let's set up a call. And until the next time, enjoy, stay curious, and I'm glad you enjoyed the show.